Okay, so this is the Bible study for Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 through 22. And the text says, When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her. And she got up and began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replied, Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Another disciple said to him, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus told him, Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. So this feels like a small chunk, but there's a lot in it, and there's a lot in the next part of the text too, so I didn't want to take too big of a chunk that we couldn't get all the way through everything. So remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us as we study this text. Number one says, what did we talk about in last week's Bible study? A, Jesus came down from the mountainside. Yes. B, the man with leprosy said, Lord, if you are willing. Yes, and I've shortened some of these answers. We know, or hopefully if you were here with us when we studied it, you know, Lord, if you are willing, you can heal me. And he expressed faith. C, Jesus told the man not to tell anyone, but to show himself to the priests and make an offering. D, a centurion asked for help, so that was the next section of the text. And then E, Jesus recognized the faith of the centurion greater than any he had seen in Israel, and he said it. So that's what happened last week when we studied this text. Number two says, what is happening now in 8:14 and 15? A, Jesus came to Peter's house. So it says, when Jesus came into Peter's house in verse 14. So he came to Peter's house, he went in. B, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. Yes. C, Jesus touched her hand and the fever left her. Yes, praise God. And then D, she got up and began to wait on him. Let's not dwell on that part. So I know that in our modern culture, we read through that text and we're praising God, and then wait, what? The mother-in-law is waiting on everybody. But let me just remind you that in the majority of cultures across history, that wives and mothers felt honored to have the role of caring for their family and showing hospitality to anybody who would enter their home. I grew up in out in the country, and if you came over, you got food, and if my mom was cooking or if my grandma was caring for people, there was nobody saying, oh, I feel put in a box, oh, I feel kept pushed down, but actually this was where people felt very fulfilled as they were all that they had hoped to be as a wife and a mother. So I know that is not the common thinking, and even saying that seems to be chauvinistic at some level in these days, but there were plenty of people very happy with that role, feeling fulfilled in that role, who would have wanted to be healed so that they could fulfill their role in the family and in the household. And so this is not quite as negative a thing as we might consider it in modern times. So She was healed, and so she got up and served others in her household and was happy to do so. Number two, no, that's what I just talked about. Number three, what happened according to 8:16 when evening came? It says, when evening came, many who were demon possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. So he drove out spirits of the demon possessed that were brought to him, many, and he healed all the sick. So that's what happened when evening came. Why, according to 8:17, is this a significant part of the story? So Matthew contextualizes this by saying this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. So from Matthew's perspective, this fulfilled the prophecy that was said about the Messiah. The third part of the question says, how does this connect with the reason for the writing in Matthew's gospel that we talked about in the introduction Bible study? So it's been long enough that maybe we've forgotten this by now, but we talked about Matthew's gospel primarily being written to Jewish people who were trying to understand how Jesus fit with their traditional understanding of the law and God's plan. And so when Matthew was able to show Jesus as the fulfillment of the law, when Matthew was able to show Jesus as the one that was spoken about in the prophets beforehand, he does so, and that is a core reason for the writing. So it's not just a theme in the writing, but it's a theme because it's the reason he was writing this text to begin with. Number four, what happened next according to 8:18 and 19? A, Jesus saw the crowd around him. Yes. B, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Yes. C, a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. So presumably this was on the other side of the lake after they crossed. I'm not sure. Maybe he was chasing after the boat as they were about to cross, but it doesn't say that. Um, so then number five says, how according to 8:20 did Jesus respond to this amazing statement of faith? So think about this. Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. How would we respond as a pastor if somebody said, I'm all in? I'm ready to do whatever the church needs me to do. I'm ready to follow God and serve him in any way he asks. Um, awesome, hop in, or come on, or whatever. He hop in if he was calling him to come along in the boat, come on, whatever. Yeah, come on, let's go. A lot of pastors, this would be the most exciting thing that we heard in a week, in a month, perhaps in a year, and we would put them right into ministry, and we would ask no questions. And in fact, I'll just be honest with you. In my time as an associate pastor, there were times when I had people that I'm like, these people are all on board. This is awesome. They're excited about getting involved in the church, doing ministry. You know, they if only their last church had let them do ministry the way they wanted to do ministry, everything would have worked better there. And my pastor told me to be cautious. Cautiously optimistic, sure, but cautious, because you never know if somebody left another church. They're probably going to find reasons why they don't like this church too. It is quite common, and honestly, he told me it's easier to keep somebody out of ministry than to get them out of ministry, which in the church usually we don't want to get people out of ministry. We want to get people in ministry, which is a hard thing to do, by the way, a lot of times, to get faithful people into the ministry when they have sort of grown up with a culture perhaps in the church where they didn't really need to participate. But here's the truth, is that some people who say they're all in are not all in. And so then once they get in, then they try to steer the boat, if you will. They try to change the direction that you're going. So somebody can come in very excited about what you're doing, and once they get in, try to start turning the tide, turning the direction of the church in a different way that's not the way that God is calling you to go. And I had that blow up on me a few times early in ministry, where I put somebody in that was sort of emotionally perhaps ready, or um, they were stable, they were consistent, they attended regularly, they were churchy type people that sort of knew how to talk and what to do. But in the end, I realized that they were not as fully committed to what God was calling us to do as they had initially seemed to be or stated that they were. So Jesus doesn't say, awesome, hop in. He knows the heart of the person, and he looks at them and says the thing that that person needed to hear. Foxes have dens. And again, I've cut this off a little bit because if you read it, if you're familiar with this scripture, then you have probably heard this before. Foxes have dens, and it goes on. Birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So, in other words, I don't even have what animals have. I am homeless, essentially, and you need to know what you're signing up for. So, C kind of clarifies or interprets for us. You're excited now, but I want you to make sure you know what you're signing up for. It isn't a life of importance, significance, and popularity. We're going to deny ourselves for the good of others. Are you really ready for that? And I think sometimes that question needs to be asked before we drive full force with somebody new that's coming to sort of follow Jesus or be a part of our church. Um, is, do you understand? Are you counting the cost ahead of time? Do you realize that the life of a disciple is a life of self-denial? So if you're signing up for this, that's what you're signing up for. You're not signing up to be popular. And honestly, sometimes I feel like that discussion needs to be had again for those that are called to pastoral ministry. There's a lot of people that jump in because they think it's the center point. It's the place where you get to stand in front of people and talk, and you end up influential and popular. But the reality is usually you end up unpopular, um, and you make a good target. And so if you're not willing to sign up for that, if you're not willing to sign up for a life of self-denial and selflessness, then you're not ready. So come back when you're ready, more or less, is the thought. Number 6, what did another disciple say to him according to 8:21? Another disciple said, Lord, first let me go bury my father. Lord, first let me go bury my father. Number 7 says, how did Jesus respond to that? A, yes, of course, that is a totally reasonable request, which is not what he said. B, follow me. He said, no, no, no. I didn't say wait till you're ready or whatever. I said follow me. Um, C, let the dead bury their own dead. That doesn't sound nice. So follow me. Let the dead bury their own dead. Burying your father is not the important thing right now. What's important is that you respond to my call. So D says, some have suggested that the man was asking for more than just a day for the funeral. So some of us think that he was saying, let me, my father just died, let me bury him. And that's I think in Jewish custom is something that needs to be done in 24 hours. So some think that that's what it is, but many have suggested that he wasn't asking for a day for the funeral, but rather that he live the life the way he wants until his father passes, and then he will be freed up to follow Jesus, working with his father on the farm, or supporting his father is his responsibility now. But once all that responsibility is over, then he won't have responsibility anymore. This is akin to being called to ministry and say, God, when I retire, I'll go into ministry. I'll be a pastor. It'll be the perfect time. I'll have a 401k to live on, or I'll have a pension or whatever. Not too many pensions around these days, but maybe if you work for the government, when I retire, I'll be a pastor. Um, if God is calling you, He's calling you now, not then. But does it really matter what the request was, whether it was a day or 30 years? He was not actually ready to follow. There were conditions. So that was ultimately the problem, is that Jesus was calling him to follow, and he said he wanted to follow, but he said, first, I'm going to follow eventually. And I mean, that's one of the greatest lies of the enemy. I mean, that's what I thought as a college student, a young person. You know, let me do my own things, sow my wild oats or whatever, do whatever I want now. But when I'm older and I have a family, and I want to be a good example to them. Guess what? Not a lot of people don't make it to there. A lot of people don't. The life that they set their course on does not get them to there. So that's the thing, is following God gets them to this life that they envision of clean and sober and all those things, that a good example to my kids. But following the path that they want to stay on doesn't get you there. It gets you divorced with kids that hate you, and so you end up on this path that never, you can't get it turned around. You may be able to get saved, and um, the eternal consequences of your sin are forgiven, but the earthly consequences of your sin will still be there, and they are incredibly damaging and hurtful for a lot of people, including you, and especially you, perhaps. So let's not wait. There shouldn't be conditions. I'll follow you when this happens. I'll follow you after this. I'll follow you if I can do this. No, there's no conditions. So number 8 says, "What are your conditions?" And this, I just told you there's no conditions. So now, spiritual answer, Bible study answer, you can say there's no conditions, Pastor, no conditions. No, let's be honest. What are the conditions? You've been negotiating with God for some time. He's been calling you to something. Maybe not. Maybe you are following faithfully. But many people that are listening to me and are going to be in our Bible studies have been negotiating with God for some time about when they will follow, how they will follow, what they're willing to give up and what they're not willing to give up to follow, and so the question becomes, what are your conditions? Because Jesus says, let the dead bury their own dead. There should be no conditions here. Just follow me. Follow me now. Um, so that's where we're at here. We'll keep studying this text. There's some really powerful things coming up as well, so I'm looking forward to that. But let's consider what conditions we've put on our following of God.